Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for coming. First, as always, we dedicate the share to pray for the lasting unity of Am Yisrael. Thank you, which will lead to an ultimate victory, and for all of those whose health has been affected by terror. There are no other special dedications, but whichever neshamos need aliyah should have aliyah. Whichever cholim need refuah should, of course, have refuah. Next week in Yitzchak Hashem there will be a class, but there will be a Hanukkah party right here, starting at 7:15 p.m. The class will begin at 8:30 as usual, so you can come for the food and leave if you want to, but there will be a shir at 8:30. Please RSVP in advance for the event. And in addition, YIBONEH's Hanukkah and end of the year campaign is underway. We can partner with YIBONEH and continue to help so many people through the chesed programs, the social events, and the Torah classes. And special dedications are available to honor the memory of loved ones. More information about how to contribute can be found on the YIBONEH website and in the YouTube description box below. And again, I want to wish everybody a meaningful, inspirational, lichtige Chanukah, a Chanukah full of light. I wanted to talk today actually about Chanukah a little bit. It'll probably be a two-parter because obviously at the Chanukah party I will talk about Chanukah as well. But there's enough material, so to speak, that it's worthwhile to talk about. First of all, the Maharal has a little sefer, a relatively short sefer on Chanukah that's called Ner Mitzvah. Very, very fascinating sefer. And it's kind of funny because Ner Mitzvah, well, in the older editions, there are no divisions at all. It's just one uninterrupted text of around 50 pages. But in the Rav Hartman edition that annotates and everything else, he divides the Ner Mitzvah into three chalakim. Chelak Aleph is not about Chanukah, it is about the four kingdoms, the four exiles, of which Yavan is only one of them. Part 2 is about Yavan and Chanukah. And part 3 is a long digression about Jews who were not careful in keeping the laws about drinking wine that's touched by non-Jews. Now, what does that have to do with Chanukah? It's very, very interesting. The Maharal used it as an excuse, basically, because there is a Gemara that says, Haragil Bener, if you are conscientious in the mitzvos of lighting Chanukah candles and Shabbos candles, you are given the reward of having children who are Talmidei Chachamim, because Torah is compared to light. But then it says, if you're conscientious in getting wine for Kiddush, you will be zocha to a lot of wine. And the Maharal explains that refers to the wine of Olam Haba, and the Maharal used this as a fascinating excuse to give a lot of tochacha to something that's almost inconceivable to us, but apparently there were many religious Jews who were not conscientious about drinking the wine that was prepared by Gentiles, and the Maharal gives a lot of tochacha in his book on Chanukah. So if you want to know, where does the Maharal talk about Yayin Nesach? He talks about it in the last 5 pages of Ner Mitzvah. But I'm not going to focus on part 3, obviously, but I do want to focus on part 1, because before the Maharal segued into discussing Yavan, he wants to discuss Yavan's role as part of the 4 exiles that the Jewish people have to go through before there is a Mashiach. Now, in reality, there's actually a precedent for the Maharal's approach here, and that is none other than the song that we sing after we light Chanukah candles, the very beloved song, Ma'oz Tzur. If you look at the stanzas of Ma'oz Tzur, and by the way, it's a very intricate poetic structure in terms of half lines and lines, rhyming and the like, but if you look, you will notice that most of Ma'oz Tzur is not about Chanukah at all. It is essentially going over the history of the Jewish people and God redeeming us from all of the exiles. The first stanza is a general idea that Hashem has protected and will protect Am Yisrael, and we will eventually have a Beis HaMikdash. That's stanza number 1. Stanza number 2 talks about the Egyptian slavery and servitude. Stanza number 3 is the Babylonian exile and Chorban Beis HaMikdash. Stanza number 4 is Persia and Haman. Stanza number 5 is Yavan. That's the only one about Hanukkah. Yavanim, that's why it's a separate niggin. Yavanim nikbatzu alai. And stanza number 6 is the prayer that just as Hashem has redeemed us from all of the other exiles, so may He redeem us from the gullus of Edom, the gullus of Esav that we are still in. So essentially, I'm not sure if this was conscious, but the Maharal's approach in Chelek Aleph of Ner Mitzvah is essentially paralleling the song Ma'osur, which sees Yavan not as an isolated phenomenon, but sees Yavan as part of the archetype of the 4 exiles that we have to go through. The notion of the 4 exiles, the Maharal brings a medrash, is built into the very fabric of creation as a necessary condition for messianic redemption. That somehow, the Maharal writes, that in all creation there is a flaw. Hashem is perfect. But as HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes a physical world, inevitably there are going to be defects and distortions in physical reality. And Hashem made it that way. Of course, Hashem was not bound by anything. He could have made the world perfect. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu introduced imperfections into the world so that we become co-creators of the perfect world by our Torah and by our mitzvahs and our tshuva. And the Medrash says, already in the very beginning of Chumash Bereishis, there is a remez to the 4 Malchios. Let's look at the pasuk. Haaretz haisa sayhu vavayu. Right before God started creating, the world was astonishing. The universe really, was astonishingly empty. Tahu is emptiness. Bayu is confused jumble. Now you already see there's a contradiction in those 2 terms. Total emptiness and a jumbled confusion. V'choshech al pnei tahom. And there was darkness on the face of the deep. V'ruach Elokim merachefes al pnei hamayim. The Spirit of God hovered above the water. Vayomer Elokim. And Hashem said, Yihi or, let there be light. Vayihi or. Now, these are psukim that, when you read these psukim, you can't help but be moved that there's something remarkably powerful here, but we have no idea what it is. Something is being said here. So listen to what the Medrash says. I mean, this is one of many, many midrashim on it. The Medrash says, Tayu, astonishingly empty, is a remez to Babylon, which emptied the world of the Beis HaMikdash, created a vacuum by, so to speak, banishing Hashem's active connection of the Shekhinah. Bayu, confusion, refers to Persia. As Megillas Esther said, when Haman promulgated his decree of genocide against the Jewish people, and Achashverosh approved it, Ho'ir Shushan Nevocha, even the Goyim in Shushan didn't know what was going on. They were confused. It didn't make sense. So Tayu is Bavel, and Bayu is Paras. Chayshech, darkness, is Yavan and Antiochos, who darkened the eyes of the Jewish people with their decrees against the Torah. Al Pnei Tahim, on the face of the depths. That's a reference to the gullus of Edom, the gullus of Rome, which is so long, it's seemingly without end. It's like a bottomless ocean that you drop something and you don't even hear it hit the bottom. Now, the Ruach Elokim, the Spirit of God, is the Kayach of Mashiach that'll bring redemption to the world. Mirachefet al pnei hamayim, hovering over the water. The water represents tshuva. This is a little bit of a new twist. We know Torah is compared to water, but here the Medrash says tshuva is compared to water. As the pasuk says in Eicha, and it's a very famous Shlomo Carlebach song, Shifchi kamayim libech, nochach pnei Hashem, pour out your heart like water before God. And the Medrash says that's referring to tshuva. Right? The Ruach Elokim, the Ruach of Mashiach, will come through the water of tshuva, shifchi kamayim libech nochach pnei Hashem. And then what will then happen? Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or. Hashem says, let there be light. That is the light of redemption, the light of perfection, the light of Kedusha. So the Medrash is teaching me, already encoded in the very fabric of creation, is this message that there will be these negative kochos in the world, called the four Goliot. Now Mitzrayim is not counted because Mitzrayim is a pre-Golus Golus, because we talk about Golus only when we were in Eretz Yisrael, then we were exiled against our will. Mitzrayim, we came on our own and then we were stuck. So Mitzrayim is what you might call the pre-Golus Golus. So we don't count that in the four. But the four are said to be Bavel, Paras, Yavan, Edom. And they are encoded in the Pasuk, Ha'aretz haisa soihu vavayu, v'chayshech al pnei tahayim, Baruch Elokim rachevas al pnei hamayim, Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or. Now, there are many, many other places where the Psukim make reference to the four Malchios. Among them, the most explicit references are in the book of Daniel. Now, Sefer Daniel is an absolutely fascinating book of Nach, which is unfortunately ignored even by people who learn Nach. In other words, most people ignore Nach, so that's a general problem. Even the people who learn Nach, they ignore Sefer Daniel. But the four kingdoms emerge both in Nebuchadnezzar's dream that Daniel interprets. Daniel is very much like Yosef. Daniel became great in Nebuchadnezzar's palace through his dream interpretation. And Nebuchadnezzar had a dream of a statue that was a human form, a huge, huge statue of a human being. And the head of the statue was gold. And the chest and the arms were silver. And the abdomen and the thighs were copper. And the legs, the lower legs, were iron. And a stone, a big stone, was torn off a mountain. And it knocked down the statue. And Daniel said to Nebuchadnezzar, this is a remez. Nebuchadnezzar is Bavel. The gold is Bavel. And the silver is Paras. And the copper is Yavan. And the iron is Rome, because iron destroys. And the stone is basically Hashem, that is called Sur Yisrael. We say every day, the rock of Israel. You know, that's a big... I think people are too critical, because if you want to be critical, you'll find faults with everything. But you know, one of the criticisms people have about the Israeli Declaration of Independence from 1948 is it does not mention HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It does not mention God, which even the American Declaration of Independence mentions, but it simply says, we put our faith in Sur Yisrael. So people like to darshan. So for the people who believe in Hashem, Hashem is Sur Yisrael. For the people who don't believe in Hashem, it's Jewish destiny or whatever it is. So they like to knock. They say Sur Yisrael was deliberately used not to enshrine an open and unequivocal reference to Hashem. Okay, I don't know if you have to be so negative on everything, but okay. But here, in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the Tsur is Sur Yisrael. Now, Daniel does not identify what these four kingdoms are. The only thing he says to Nebuchadnezzar is, you are the head of gold. And the other three are going to come after you. He doesn't say who they are, but Chazal say, over and over again, that after Bavel is Paras, which actually is in Tanakh. After Paras is Yavan. After Yavan is Edom. Daniel himself has a very frightening vision of a sea in the middle of the night, a turbulent ocean. And the waters are turbulent and waves. And out of the ocean emerge, it was a two-night vision. Night number one, 3 beasts. The first is a fearsome lion with the wings of an eagle. And the next is a bear. And the third is a leopard. Right? So lion, bear, leopard are night 1. Night 2 is a monster that is huge, and it's not even described as a known animal, with teeth of iron. And these are the 4 Malchias. Again, the notion is the first 3, Bavel, Paras, Yavan. Rome gets its own night because the Roman Galut is much, much longer than all of the Galuses combined, right? So again, and there are many, many other sources as well. Maharal collates many, many Makoros regarding the four kingdoms. And the four kingdoms, we have to go through their rule and their evil and their oppression until the Mashiach comes. So, just as a matter of interpretation, I just want to raise two simple questions about the four Malchios, and that is, Chazal assume for a davar pashut that we are in Golus number 4, which is called the Golus of Edom, the Golus of Esav. So the question is, why are we called in the Roman Golus at all? The Roman Empire is long gone, hasn't been around for quite a long time. The Western Roman Empire, the official date for its demise is 476, which is quite a long time ago. And although the Byzantine Eastern Roman Empire survived in Constantinople much longer until the Islamic conquests, but that's the famous date in world history of 1453, the fall of Constantinople to Islam. So be it as it may, in what way are we in the Roman Golus, right? So there are three short answers I'll give you, and each of these answers could have a great deal of elaboration. Answer number one is this. Hey, we don't care if there are Romans around or not, but the Romans destroyed the Beis HaMikdash and put us into Golus. That Golus has not been reversed. Baruch Hashem, Medidat Yisrael may or may not be part of the redemptive process. That's Reishit Tzmichat Gulatena. I'm not going to get into that. But we certainly haven't totally gotten out of that Golus because we don't have a Beis HaMikdash or Mashiach. So as a result, we can rightfully call this the Golus of Edom, even if Edom is not involved actively, because the Golus they perpetrated has not been reversed yet. So this is called Golus Edom. That's answer number one. Answer number two is that Rome basically is the source of what is Western civilization. Now, it's true that the foundations of Western civilization actually come from Yavon. Greece laid down the philosophy and the metaphysical structures, even ideas of democracy and government. Virtually everything that's in Western civilization that's not connected to the holiness of the Torah comes from Greece. But Rome was the intermediate party that spread it throughout the world. So Western civilization is, Greece may be the originators, but Rome is the source of how it got to the European countries and then eventually to the Americas and the like. Even the legal system. It's true that, let's say, in England and the United States, the legal system was based on what's called common law, but common law itself has Roman law roots and the like. So therefore, we could say that Esav has morphed to become a kinoi, a nickname for Western civilization. And it's true that there are great Eastern civilizations in the world, but Jews are primarily, historically, under the domination of Western civilization, which is Golus Edom. And the third answer is the relationship of Rome and Christianity. We know that Rome, at some point, even though Yashka and the apostles, who were all Jewish, were all in Eretz Yisrael, but Peter, Shimon, as we know him by his original name, Shimon, kind of moved to Rome. He was the first bishop of Rome, becoming the head of the Catholic Church, which for hundreds of years was Christianity, basically, and then there was the Reformation. But still, we identify the fact that the fate of the Jewish people has been linked predominantly to Christian oppression or Christian assimilation, either side of the coin, and therefore, in a sense, just as Esav Rome morphed into Western civilization, Esav Rome morphed into Christianity, and the two overlap. Christianity, Western civilization, they're kind of all connected. In fact, that's the famous line of the anti-Semites, meaning to say that, hey, if you're not Christian, then by definition, you're against Western civilization, which is fundamentally Christian. Be it as it may, I just gave you three reasons why we're still in the Golus of Esav. Esav are the challenges of hedonism, the challenges of materialism, the challenges that try to take us away from Kedusha. But I'll get back to this. Now, a second question one might ask about the 4 exiles, and this is a question of the Ibn Ezra. The Ibn Ezra asks, why do we not include the Golus of Yishmael? Now, Yishmael was the ancestor of the Arabs. Now, Yishmael was not a Muslim. I mean, Muhammad wasn't born until years later. But Yishmael is the ancestor of the Arab nations. The Arab nations were pagan, and they eventually, most of them became Muslim, some became Christian, and the like. And in the Ibn Ezra's time was in the 11th century, the Islamic Empire was huge. And most of the Jews in the world were, in fact, under Islamic domination. So the Ibn Ezra didn't understand why doesn't Daniel have a 5th kingdom, so to speak, which is Malchus Yishmael. And the truth of the matter is, that's a question that still exists even today. Because even if it's true that in terms of territory and in terms of dominion over Jews, Islam is not a major force. There are not that many Jews who live directly under the rule of Islam. But in terms of the impact on Jews in the world, it is a tremendous impact. Islamic fundamentalism, Islamic terrorism. We're just coming off the 2 tragic years starting in October 7, and then go back to the United States to 9/11 and all sorts of things in between. So even if the question is not the same way as the Ibn Ezra raised it, right? The Ibn Ezra raised the question because there was this huge Islamic empire under which most of the Jews were subjugated. Even if that's not the question, we still have the question that why is the power of Malchus Yishmael not recognized? And the short answer is that indeed, Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, which is a medrash, actually says that the last galus that we are going to experience before Mashiach comes is the galus of Yishmael. And that's even the meaning of the famous messianic phrase taken from the Navi Zechariah. Ani v'rochev al chamor, Mashiach will be impoverished. He will ride on a donkey. Yishmael is sometimes pejoratively described as Am Hadoimeh Lechamor, a nation that is like a donkey. The Mashiach will ride on the donkey of Yishmael. And Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer says, the Golus of Yishmael will be the hardest and most difficult Golus of all. Now I have to be careful, because I know, people call it to my attention, that Islamic groups, whenever I talk about this sometimes, whenever I mention the power of Yishmael, they will take the 3 sentences out of context and say, Rabbi says, Arabs are going to win, type of thing. So I got to be careful, and people ask me, actually I'm not going to be careful, I'm not going to censor myself, but people ask me, how are you going to respond? And I say, listen, the only way you can respond to this, the only way you could stop this is by not saying anything. If you say something, your words can be distorted. So I guess the question is it better to talk or better not to talk at all? That is a good question, by the way. But right now, at least, I am going to talk, even though I do rethink this all the time. And that is, Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer says, the fight against Yishmael is the most difficult battle that we engage in, because Esav is primarily brute force. As Yitzchak Avinu said, Hakol Kol Yaakov. The voice is the voice of Yaakov. Yaakov has the power of the voice, Torah learning, tefillah, yadayim, brute physical strength is Esav. And since it's a davar pashut, that spirituality will eventually always overcome physicality. Maybe not in the short term, but in the long term for sure. So we can be batuach that our ruchnius will overcome the galus of Edom. But Yishmael, the Medrash says, has spiritual merit underlying its physical brutality. They have the merit of circumcision that was given to Avraham. They have the merit of prayer to Hashem, although they may employ the prayer for evil ways, and that itself is a very difficult idea, that somehow there's still a merit of prayer. It's a very, very difficult idea. They have the merit of at least external tznius, external modesty, although in private life that's not necessarily going to be the case. There are spiritual zechuyot. And if that's the case, Yishmael will not be defeated exclusively by military strength or strategy. Yishmael can only be defeated. I mean, you need the hishtadlut. I'm not diminishing the importance of the hishtadlut, but you need the strength of Torah, the strength of Kedusha, because Yishmael comes with certain strengths that it got from Avram. But since most Jews do not live directly under Yishmael, they live under Esav, Western civilization. So the way we look at it is, we regard the Galus Yishmael as an intensification of the Roman Galus, Galus Edom. So it's Galus Edom version 2.0. It's not a separate Galus, but it's an intensification of Galus Edom. And the Maharal throws out a thought, seemingly out of nowhere, in which he says that the Galus Yishmael B'Acharit HaYamim will involve a collaboration with Paras, meaning that somehow Yishmael will link up with Paras for the final attacks on the Jewish people. This is, quite frankly, quite astounding. Paras is Persia. Persia is Iran. And Maharal simply says, he doesn't even document it. He just says like a simple observation, that it's a davar pashut, that Yishmael will be mechaber with Paras to seek the destruction of the Jewish people, but this will occur in the tail end of Galus Edom. So this is like a junction of all the bad stuff. You got Esav, Galus Edom. You got Yishmael, you got Paras. They all kind of come together, and even if they're fighting each other, but they have a common enemy. Meaning in their fighting each other, there's a common enemy which happens to be us, and that's kind of the pressures that are the birth pains of Mashiach, that are the chavlei Mashiach, and the like. Very, very, very fascinating. I mean, certainly the Ner Mitzvah is written in a very abbreviated way, so the Maharal does not fully develop all of these implications, but now one could certainly write a book kind of spelling this out and applying it to current events, although the Rambam himself would not be in favor of that. The Rambam actually didn't like when people try to match up current events to the Messianic era, because the Rambam says we're never going to know until after the fact. When Mashiach comes, we'll then be able to understand how the pieces fit in. He was kind of against doing it ahead of time. Okay, but be it as it may, this is what the Maharal says. Now, we haven't mentioned Chanukah yet. We've just talked about the 4 exiles. But the Maharal then develops the idea that each exile poses a distinct danger to the Jewish people. And that is, Bavel simply involved persecution and enslavement. Now we see, this is an interesting mistake that we make. We tend to look at all bad guys as bad in the same way. We think, Nebuchadnezzar didn't want people to do mitzvahs. Nebuchadnezzar didn't allow people to keep Shabbos. That wasn't true. Nebuchadnezzar was an Oved Avodah Zarah, but he didn't care. If you wanted to do Daf Yomi, you could do what you want. Nebuchadnezzar's goal was power. Nebuchadnezzar's goal was conquest. Nebuchadnezzar did not destroy the Beis HaMikdash because he was rebelling against God. Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the Beis HaMikdash because he saw the Beis HaMikdash as a center around which the Jewish people would revolt against him. And Yirmiyahu told the Jewish people, do not wage war against the Babylonians, because if you do, God is not going to protect you and you're going to lose the temple. Meaning, in other words, had the Jewish people decided not to wage war and had they listened to Yirmiyahu, the Churban Beis HaMikdash could have been averted. So Maharal says Bavel represents the persecution of the Umot HaOlam that is not necessarily directed against religion. It's not directed against religion. It is simply power, domination, subjugation. And Bavel was the one that took away our political independence. Right? So that's Bavel. Bavel, the striving for power, which results in enslavement and persecution. Paras, Persia, which was a relatively short period in our history, but the most important event there was the story of Purim, and that represents genocide. That represents the hatred of Amalek that seeks to destroy physically the Jewish people. Okay, so if Bavel is about enslavement and persecution, Paras is about genocide. Paras is about Hitler. Now again, it didn't make a difference. Haman did not care, just as Hitler did not care, if you were religious or non-religious. If you were Jewish, you had to go. Although in a deeper sense, Hitler's a bit more complicated, and I'll get to that. But at least Haman was not into religion either. Haman just wanted to get rid of Jews because of the insane jealousy he had with Mordechai. That's another question. If you ask, why did Haman hate Jews? Well, our answer would be he comes from Amalek. But the Megillah's answer is he was angry at Mordechai for not bowing down to him, which is kind of insane, but that's what the Megillah says. Okay. So, once again, Bavel, persecution and enslavement. Paras, genocide. Yavan. Yavan is very, very, very different. And Yavan, of course, is the story of Hanukkah. It is true that the story of Hanukkah involved a war. And it's true that in that war, Jews were killed. And Antiochus killed Jews. But you have to remember, at its inception, this was not a war against the Jews as Jews. This was a war against the Torah. Antiochus promulgated decrees that were specifically focused on the Jewish people abandoning the Torah. Not to practice circumcision. Not to keep Shabbos. Not to keep kosher. Women not going to the mikveh. In fact, people don't realize this. Antiochus, which is post-biblical, this is after Tanakh. Antiochus was literally the first king in history, first non-Jewish king. Actually, we had Jewish kings that made gezeros, Manasseh and the like. But the first non-Jewish king in Jewish history who tried deliberately to take Jews away from the Torah. Paro didn't try that. Nebuchadnezzar didn't try that. Achashverosh didn't try that. Yavan tried it. This is a major difference of Yavan and the others. Yavan was a war against the Torah. It happened to be, by the way, most of the Jewish people went along. They assimilated. This is part of Hellenism. Hellenism was a movement started with Alexander the Great more than 100 years before Antiochus to spread the culture of Greece throughout the world. And the truth of the matter is, many, many, many Jews, perhaps a majority of the Jewish people, became assimilated to Hellenism without coercion. In many, many ways, Antiochus didn't have to do anything. This was the natural process that was happening. But Antiochus got impatient. He wanted to hurry it a bit. And he said, there are too many Jews still keeping kosher, too many Jews still keeping Shabbos, too many Jews still learning Torah. They are preventing the Hellenization and the spread of Greek wisdom. And therefore I will have to use coercion. And the Maccabees, who refused to go along, they started a revolt and they started a fight. But it was all about, as the Al-Nisim says, Al-Nisim says it, Lahashkicham Torasecha. The Yevonim made decrees to cause us to forget the Torah. In a perverse way, in a very perverse way, one could describe Antiochus as a very enlightened king. He wasn't anti-Semitic. If you go with the plan, if you assimilate, if you give up that which makes you different than anybody else, you will have full civil and political rights as a citizen of my empire. That was it. It wasn't like the Nuremberg laws, but you got to go with the plan. So Maharal says the characteristic of Golus Yavan is not persecution or genocide. It is assimilation. Assimilation starting as a voluntary thing, come join us, and then turning into a coercive thing. But it was direct against the Torah. And the Maharal points out that in a way it's paradoxical, because Yavan is blessed with the greatest chachma, the greatest wisdom. So one might even assume they perhaps ought to be allies with the wisdom of the Torah. But the Maharal quotes the Gemara that says, Uman sonei b'nei umnaso. People who are in a profession, they hate the competition. Meaning, we're competitors to Yavan. They have reached the epitome of human wisdom. Torah gives us divine wisdom. Yavan hates Torah because Torah relegates their wisdom to an inferior position vis-a-vis Torah. And that's why it's Bedafka Yavan that is the makar, the source of chachma, that wages war against Torah Hashem. See, the brute, I'll get to Rome in a moment, the brute doesn't care if you keep mitzvahs. As long as you pay your taxes, as long as you listen to him, as long as you keep to yourself and don't bother us. Right? Nick Fuentes, right? Famous, getting to be famous anti-Semite. He doesn't care what you do in your shul, unless maybe it's a nefesh b'nefesh, a Zionist thing. He doesn't care what you do in your shul. Yeah, keep your mitzvahs. Just keep your mouth shut. So the brute doesn't attack the Torah. The brute just attacks Jewish power or Jewish finances, whatever it is. But Yavan is much more subtle. Yavan attacks Torah itself. And therefore, all of the assimilation is an aspect of Golus Yavan. So now, let's talk about Golus Edom, and you'll see how relevant this analysis is. Golus Edom, in Daniel's vision, is not given any description that we could name, meaning Babylon is described as a lion, and this is in Daniel's dream, and Persia is described as a bear, and Greece is described as a leopard. But Rome is described as an amorphous monster that is not described as anything. And the Maharal says that's because the Golus of Edom, which is so much longer than every other Golus, is a composite of the other three Goluses together. So there is, in the long 2,000 Golus Edom, there is going to be the Bavel of Edom, there will be the Paras of Edom, and there will be the Yavan of Edom. And in different places and in different times, we are experiencing different aspects of Edom that are mechubar, connected to Bavel, Paras, or Yavan. So, which means there are going to be times and places where Jews are simply persecuted and degraded. There are going to be times and places where Jews are actively being wiped out, the Holocaust. So that's the Persia, that's the Paras Sheba Edom. And then there are times, like in modern Western civilization, where the biggest nisayon we face is not physical survival, but the pressures of the assimilation of Western civilization, the hedonism, the intermarriage, the lack of interest in spirituality. Again, that comes and goes. So in many, many ways, Hanukkah is very, very relevant to a modern Jew, because now I know people talk about anti-Semitism, of course we had October 7th, so the issue of physical survival is still very much with us. I'm not suggesting we're out of that water. But for most people, most of the time, I think it's safe to say that the primary challenges that we face most of the time is not physical survival, but it's retaining our spiritual essence against all of the assimilationist pressures that exist in the hedonistic world. This is absolutely a challenge for people who are not yet committed to Torah and mitzvahs. But the truth of the matter is, it's a challenge even for an Orthodox Jew who is committed to Torah and mitzvahs. Because we have to realize, as Rav Hirsch remarked more than 150 years ago, he says, in some ways, the modern Orthodox Jew, he was talking about in the 1800s, the modern Orthodox Jew is the opposite of the Marrano of Spain. The Marrano of Spain was a goy on the outside and a Jew on the inside. We, Baruch Hashem, are able to be Jewish on the outside. But what is our internal value systems? What is it? Meaning even the person who's Shomer Mitzvahs, are they animated? Are our passions Ruchnius, Torah, Mitzvos, Hashem? Or do we look at the Torah sometimes as 613 problems that we have to navigate around in order to achieve what we really want to achieve in life? Now, the truth of the matter is, if someone has that attitude, I still respect them because they're still saying, I gotta work within the 613 mitzvahs. That's a madrega. That is a madrega. But you see how it is an inferior type of madrega, because instead of looking at my life is serving God and I have to figure out how to make a living while I'm doing it, sometimes it turns out to be the opposite type of thing. My life is about being a successful professional, but I got to figure out a way to achieve that goal, within the framework of the Torah, and which is primary, which is the meaning of our lives. And if serving Hashem, and again, I don't mean to give anyone much, I'm talking to myself as well, so I don't mean to put anyone down in any possible way. But if our animating passion in life is not avodas Hashem, we are being influenced by Golus Esav, which is the part of Golus Esav that's connected to Yavan. That the Chachma of Yavan becomes more significant to us than the Chachma of the Torah. So that's why Hanukkah is a very, very important time, because Hanukkah is the victory of the light of Torah, which is called light, over the Chachma of Yavan. Now, it is a difficult issue for the following reason. Let's go back to Noah. If you remember, after the flood, Noah got drunk, and Noah's nakedness was exposed. Why did he get drunk? The simple reason why he got drunk is he was depressed. He was in despair. He comes out of the teva. I mean, imagine, it's like these Twilight Zone things, you were in a bank vault when the world was destroyed by nuclear holocaust. You come out of the bank vault and you're the only guy in the world. It's kind of a depressing idea. He got drunk. But as his nakedness got exposed, so Cham either called attention to it or did something worse, castrated him, whatever it is. And then you'll remember Shem and Yefes walked backwards with a blanket to cover him up. And as a result, Noah gave special bracha. He cursed Cham. Actually, he cursed Cham's son, Canaan. That's also a question. Why is he cursing the son of Cham if Cham is the one that did? Okay. But I want to focus on the bracha. He gave Yefes a special bracha. He said, Yaft Elokim liyefes. This is a pun. Hashem should give beauty, Yofi. Yaft Elokim, God should give beauty to Yefes. V'yishkain b'ahalei Shem, and he should dwell in the tents of Shem. Now in English that sounds bad, the tents of Shem, but remember, Shem is the son of Noah, so this is a bracha. He will dwell in the tents of Shem ben Noach. Rav Shimshon of Hirsch, and we know that Rav Hirsch was in Germany, great Rav of Frankfurt for many, many years. And he basically saved. This was acknowledged even by the Eastern European Gedolim who did not agree with him in terms of secular education and the like, but it was acknowledged that he basically saved German Jewry, which was totally conquered by the Reform movement, and he managed to rebuild orthodoxy, Torah observance, and the like. So Rav Hirsch developed a school of thought that is called Torah im derech eretz, sometimes abbreviated TIDE, T-I-D-E, and that's not referring to the laundry detergent, but TIDE is Torah im derech eretz, which, again, what it exactly means is in itself subject to books and arguments, but on the most simple level, it basically means to try to integrate an unyielding commitment to Torah and mitzvos and halacha, but also be connected to secular wisdom and secular culture. And one of the, as opposed to the Eastern European model of Slobodka, Mir, the Lithuanian yeshiva, that basically considered the secular culture to be treif and no good, etc. Okay. That was a big machlokas, right? A big machlokas. Rav Hirsch was acknowledged as a great tzaddik by everybody, but there were those who disagreed with his approach of integration, and this machlokas goes on even to this very day. This machlokas goes on. But one of Rav Hirsch's foundational texts on Torah im derech eretz is his interpretation of Yaftel Lakim Liyefes V'yishkan B'al Hashem. He says that Noach envisioned from his children, who are the progenitors of humanity, the human race, there are two primary missions humanity has in the world. The first and most important mission is to promulgate godliness and kedusha and subservience to a creator who is the source of ultimate morality and values. That mission was given to Shem, the son of Noach, and through Shem it eventually came down to Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Bnei Yisrael, through that process of elimination. But initially it was entrusted to Shem. Godliness, kedusha.
Before the questions are.
But there was a second mission given to humanity. That was a beautiful mission as well, but it was in secondary importance. And that is to create beauty in the world. Now, beauty can exist in many forms. There's the beauty of art. There's the beauty of music. There's the beauty of literature. There's the beauty of culture, of even athleticism, sport, the human body. And that was given to Yefes. And remember, Yefes' son was Yavan. So the same way, went from Shem to Avram. It went from Yefes to Yavan. And Yavan had this mission, to create beauty in all of its different guises. And again, by beauty, I don't mean just physical beauty, but I include intellectual beauty, philosophy, and all of that. So what does Noach says? God has given beauty to Yefes, but only when it dwells in the tents of Shem. Meaning, that's telling you two things. Number one, Shem can admit it. Shem should not expel it. You see? And number two, Yavan has value when it's subordinated to Shem, but not when it stands in opposition to Shem. So Rav Hirsch uses that pasuk as really the foundational principle of Torah im derech eretz. There's no question which is number one. Right? It's not derech eretz im Torah, Torah im derech eretz. But Rav Hirsch maintained that the beauty of Yavan, which is Western civilization coming through the Romans, but it started with Yavan, and again, just from an objective standpoint, the Greek accomplishment in all of these fields is quite a phenomenal accomplishment. But when it stands in opposition to Shem, then it becomes destructive, it becomes oppressive, it becomes suffocating, it becomes a war against Hashem. And then it has to be destroyed or at least reclaimed, recaptured. Okay? So this is why the war against Yavan is a difficult war. Because unlike Amalek, that's totally evil, and Amalek got to be destroyed. Yavan is not totally evil. There is chachma. There is beauty. It's evil when it's not brought into the house of God. But there ought to be a mechanism by which it can be brought in. And indeed, what does the famous Medrash Eicha say? The famous Medrash Eicha says, if someone says to you, is there chachma b'goyim, is there wisdom among the goyim? The answer is yes. Is there the Torah among the goyim? That is no. That's a certain measure. That's the divine wisdom, as it were. So that's the great challenge. The great challenge of the nitzachon against Yavan is the goal is not to obliterate that enemy, but to reclaim that enemy and integrate it within our framework so that the beauty of Yavan, Yefes, which is the beauty of Yavan, is Yishkain B'Olei Shem, lives within the tents of Shem. That's a big challenge. It's a very big challenge. Just, it's much more, it might be easier to totally reject something. Okay, if I have a philosophy of rejecting, I reject it. That's fine. Or if I have a philosophy of embracing it, that's also destructive because I'm simply making the secular culture my morality. What a Jew is supposed to do is, you don't embrace it and you don't reject it, you selectively reclaim it. And then it becomes integrated and suffused with Kedusha. That was the goal of Torah im Derech Eretz. Now, there's a lot of subtleties here which I'm not going to address. YU, Yeshiva University, officially has a philosophy that is called Torah Umada. And they go to great lengths to try to differentiate it from Torah im Derech Eretz. But at the end of the day, it's like the Gemara says, they're trying to put an elephant through the eye of a needle. The distinctions they make are very, very subtle, and I personally do not think they're that meaningful. Torah Umada, Torah im Derech Eretz, the Tzad HaShaveh Shebahem there is a recognition that secular wisdom, secular beauty can enhance one's spiritual identity if you subordinate it to Torah and mitzvahs. But I'll tell you an interesting thing. I'm sure many of you have heard of the Lander colleges. So Lander colleges were founded by Professor Lander, Dr. Lander. What was his first name? I don't remember his first name. But Bernie Lander. Yeah, Bernie Lander, who died a few years ago, and he was quite a person. He named all the colleges after himself, but still, he was a real go-getter. I once had occasion. He was in his 80s, and I was, I think, in my late 50s. Or early 50s, and I had occasion, for some reason I had to hang around him for a day, and I was absolutely exhausted. He was going from place to place to place to place to place, unlimited energy. And he told me a very cute word. He had been in YU for many years, and then he left YU and he started his own colleges. So he said, I don't go for Torah and Derech Eretz, I don't go for Torah Umada. He says, my motto is Torah Uparnasa. Meaning to say, his position was, I'm not going to glorify secular wisdom as, it gives you deeper spiritual insight, which maybe Rav Hirsch would say, and the like. Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, Zichrono Livracha, would say that you can get spiritual insight from Shakespeare. He says, I don't go there. He says, I just want B'nai Torah to be able to make decent livings to support their family. So he said, that's a different approach. He viewed secular education not as some spiritual thing of bringing the beauty of Yavan into the tents of Shem, which is kind of a grandiose utopian vision of integrating the secular and the holy. He said it's simply a practical, pragmatic concern of giving people the tools to be able to make a living. Now, I have to admit, Torah Parnasa doesn't have the cachet, so to speak, of Torah Derech Eretz or Torah Umada, but this is what Dr. Lander told me. And I have to say that probably was the position of my own Rosh Yeshiva. I attended Ner Yisrael Yeshiva, and Ner Yisrael allowed us to go to college in the evenings. And I remember at the 50th anniversary, I think it was during my Sheva Brachas, but I attended a luncheon with my new wife. So somebody got up and made a speech that Rav Ritterman had the foresight to understand how important it was to integrate secular chachma. Basically, he said Rav Hirsch's approach, that secular chachma is needed to truly be an Eved Hashem. So Rav Ruderman wasn't there. Rav Yaakov Weinberg, Zichrono Livracha, who is Rav Ruderman's son-in-law, and he became the Rosh Yeshiva, he got up, I was like shocked, he got up in the middle of this banquet, and he said, I have to register a protest. I have to issue a macha. This was not my father-in-law's intention. His intention was to provide an economic safety net for yeshiva students so they could support their families. He never would have glorified secular studies as kind of an end in and of themselves. So you see, this was actually a debate that burst out even at this banquet. I'm not here to address it, but tonight I'm emphasizing Rav Hirsch's debate, and that is actually why the war against Yavon, the Hanukkah war, is a difficult war, because it's not about destroying the enemy. It's about reclaiming the enemy and utilizing it in positive, beneficial ways. Okay, so this is kind of a little bit of an introduction to the Hanukkah story, and I just want to point out, I'll end with the Maharal's observation that if we ask ourselves, why is there a holiday of Hanukkah? Why? Why did our Chachamim enact an 8-day celebration of Hanukkah? And most people will say, well, because there was a miracle that the candles, which only should have burnt one day, burnt for 8 days. So we have a Hanukkah celebration of 8 days. Putting aside, for now, we'll talk about it next week, the Beis Yosef's kasha. Well, if that's the case, Hanukkah should be 7 days, right? The world's most famous kasha, because there was enough oil for 1 day. And I will tell you, I can tell you there are at least 500 answers to this question, because I have a sefer that gives 500 answers to this question. But putting that, although I think there's a lot of cheating, I think like answer 36 is a tiny little variation of answer 13, whatever. I think, at some point you're just, okay. But putting that aside, Maharal makes a more basic problem. He says, we don't make holidays every time there's like a miracle. We don't make holiday when the mun fell, etc. We make holidays when the Jewish people have been saved from a danger. In other words, you don't make a holiday because the candles burnt for 8 days. That's not a reason to make a Yom Tov. Maharal says it's a davar pashut, that the reason we make a Yom Tov of Hanukkah is because we were liberated from the oppression of Greek rule, which would have taken us away from the Torah. The miracle is symbolized by the miracle of the menorah, because that represents the light of Torah. You see the difference? It's not that we have a holiday because of that miracle. We have a holiday because Yavon was not successful in taking us away from the Torah. And Hashem gave us a miracle to kind of highlight the primacy, the victory, the ascendancy of the light of Torah over the Chachma of Yavon. So that's what Hanukkah is. Hanukkah is the victory over the spiritual dangers that we face in the modern world. And these are dangers that very much apply today. That's why it's such an interesting irony, maybe it's an unfortunate irony, that, we have what are called the Maccabee Games. So the Maccabee Games are the Jewish Olympics, and they're called by the name of the Maccabees. Now, one of the things that the Maccabees were fighting was the Greek cultural events, such as the Olympics, where people would go nude. They were fighting against that type of activity. So to put their name on an activity that has its Greek origin is a little strange. Although maybe I gave a teretz to it. You're taking the Chachma of Yavon and you're trying to incorporate it into Judaism, but that's only true if it's according to the Torah, right? That wouldn't be true if it's not according to the Torah. Okay? And that's why, somebody, okay, I don't want to get involved in too many political things. Around 10 years ago, there was a bill in the state of Maine legislature about legitimating gay marriage. As you know, in the United States, this is a big issue all over the place. I mean, even in Israel, unfortunately. So an Orthodox rabbi testified, it was around Hanukkah time, he testified in the state legislature and said, to allow such a thing would be in the spirit of the Maccabees, who stood up for personal autonomy and the right to make whatever decisions you think are the right decision. So Judah the Maccabee, I mean, it would be funny if it wouldn't be sad. Judah the Maccabee would support gay marriage as an exercise of human autonomy. That kind of misses the boat. I mean, truly, it misses the whole meaning that Hanukkah is the other way around. Hanukkah is about submitting to Hashem and not allowing these secular forces to take you away from the Torah. Right? It's not about personal autonomy. I mean, again, that's the secular take on Hanukkah, because if you don't live your life with Torah and mitzvahs, but you want to celebrate Hanukkah, so you have to redefine Hanukkah is the holiday of freedom. Well, yeah, freedom from those who try to take me away from Torah in order to keep the Torah, right? It's not about freedom. But as I say, Hanukkah has unfortunately has had its redefinitions, sometimes in a very, very incorrect way. So anyway, I wish you all a happy Hanukkah, a Hanukkah of light, and may the light of the Neiros inspire us to a new dedication. Hanukkah means dedication in our service of Hashem and in recognizing our true priorities in life. Thank you.
YIBONEH